Hello and welcome to this FlowFest presentation. We are going to talk about what's new in Flowable. And there are a lot of things that we can talk about, so let's move on. So my name is Tijs Rademakers. I work as a VP Engineering in Flowable, and I'm the lead of the product team. So let's move on to the agenda. So we are first going to talk about the Flowable architecture, so the fundamental patterns that we are using in Flowable, BPMN, CMMN, for example. Then we are going to talk about our new Flowable cloud offering and deployment option. Then we are going to talk about data. That's really an important part in process and case modeling. Then we are moving on to connectors, which is a totally new thing, which we are going to look at in detail, and then talk about other new and upcoming features in Flowable. And at the end, we can talk about some questions. So let's first dive into the Flowable architecture. So for Flowable, it's really about CMMN, BPMN, and DMN as the starting point. So this is really our foundation. This is where we build everything on top of. So OMG refers to this as a triple crown, and that's also how we see it. So we not only support CMMN, BPMN, and DMN by its own, but we also support it in using it together. So CMMN and BPMN, for example, can really work well together by having, for example, a root case model calling out to several sub-process models. So that's one example of how they could work together. And that's really a good benefit on top of just using CMMN, BPMN in isolation, because CMMN is really good for flexible, event-driven logic, and BPMN is really good for standardized, step-based logic. So then you can break apart basically your case logic into the flexible event-driven part, and then do the static predefined logic in BPMN. So that's where it really works well together. Then another point is that for Flowable, we implemented these standards using native engines. So we didn't, for example, build a BPMN engine because that was our foundation as a starting point in the Flowable project, and then just build CMMN on top of the BPMN engine. We really built a new engine purely for CMMN, dedicated to that specification, taking the strengths of that specification. And so we really see native engines as a foundation block in Flowable. And the same goes for DMN, of course. And now Flowable Open Source 7, which we released a couple of weeks back, you can also see that we really focus on these standards. So the CMMN, BPMN, DMN engine are our open source engines, which you can download from GitHub, which you can comment on, raise issues for. That's really the starting point for the Flowable product. So that takes us to the next step, where we don't stop with modeling things in CMMN, BPMN, DMN. That's just the starting point. So if you look at Flowable work and Flowable platform as a product, then you really see that we have a lot of additional model types on top of CMMN and BPMN and DMN. So here you can see a bit of a category overview of those other model types. It doesn't include every model type, but just to give a kind of insight. So from a UI point of view, we have, of course, forms and pages. We now also added dashboard components, which we will discuss a bit later. There are actions which you can define and which will appear in your UI. And then we have the data part. So where we have the data dictionary, which we will discuss, data contract, data objects, which we already had for a longer time. Now we also extended the query support, which we will discuss shortly, and content models, which you can attach to a document, so you can define metadata and other things. Then a big part is about connectivity. So a case or process doesn't work in isolation, of course. You want it to connect to your services. And we have quite extensive support there through the service registry to call out HTTP, REST-based interaction, and the event registry for all kinds of more event-driven, message-driven connectivity. So there you can think about Kafka, JMS, RabbitMQ, AWS, SQS, those kind of protocols. And then we have quite a lot of additional model types like security policy. There you can define who has access to what, who can edit a task, who can complete a task, who can work with a process. So you can pretty fine-grained define which roles have access to what. And then we have additional model types as well. So for Flowable, it's CMMN, BPMN, DMN as a starting point, but we add a lot of additional model types on top of it. So it's really a model-driven development platform. But that's not where we stop, of course. So Flowable model-driven development is really important, but it goes hand in hand with developer support. So if you are not able to do something with the models, you can always do it through the REST and Java APIs. So of course you can retrieve data, your case data, your process data. You can create cases, you can update cases, delete them if needed. So that's all possible through the REST and Java APIs. And those APIs are available in the open source project, definitely for the engines we already mentioned. But then on top of that, because that's not always the where it stops, you also want to inject your custom logic in certain points. You want to extend certain behavior in Flowable. So that's why we added a lot of extension points, a lot of ways to inject custom logic. And so on top of the REST API, the Java API, you can inject your custom logic as well. And what we try to do is what you cannot solve by the models themselves, you can solve that with custom logic. So together with the model-driven development and the REST and Java API possibilities, you should be able to build every solution. And then we are not predefining that this is the database where you can run Flowable on. This is the mobile application where you can run Flowable on. These are our cloud technologies. You can only run Flowable on-premise. You can only run Flowable in the cloud. We don't want to make that choice for you. So flexibility and deployment options is a very important part of Flowable. And that starts with the database. You can choose, I want to go with MySQL, I want to go with Postgres, I want to go with Oracle, another database. You can choose, do I use the product on-premise? Do I use the product in the cloud? Maybe embedded in your own application. Also on mobile, we have both an iOS and an Android application. And the same strategy we also now use for the cloud, where we don't predefine if you want to run on Azure, on AWS, on Google Cloud. We support that. We support Docker, Kubernetes, and all kinds of additional technologies like Terraform, Prometheus, Grafana, Argo CD. And so that's where we don't want to predefine what you are using, but you can choose what fits best with your environment, and Flowable will fit in there. So we already talked a little bit about Flowable Cloud, so let's go into that topic. So Flowable Cloud, if you go to cloud.flowable.com, you can immediately start using Flowable Cloud. So we really see it as a new deployment option in addition to our on-premise software. So it's if you go to cloud.flowable.com, it's a trial environment. You just register yourself with email and your name, and you can quickly get started in an automated way using Cloud Design, using Cloud Work. You can also download an on-premise version of Work with a 30-day trial. But you can really easily get started in that way. And that environment is set up with a shared database with tenant separation on the data and API level. So we really make sure that nobody can access data outside of their own tenant. So that's really secure. And then we implemented quite a lot of safety measures on top of the normal engine. So for example, you can imagine that it's quite possible with Flowable, a BPMN process, that you implement a loop and it would just execute indefinitely. And if you do this on premise, that's also not the best thing to do, but you stop the server, you start it again, undeploy the faulty process, and you just continue. But on this cloud environment, of course, that is not possible. So we implemented quite a bit of safety measures to make sure that looping is not possible. You have certain rate limits that you cannot start 10,000 process instances within 1 hour. So that's done in addition to the logic we already had. But the great thing is that all these safety measures that we get for the cloud are also available in our on-premise product. So we don't make a distinction there. What's in cloud is available on-premise and the other way around. Then this is about the trial environment to get you quickly started, try out Flowable. But there will also be a production environment. So the target is to do this early 24. And there we will also do a SOC 2 certification process to really ensure that everything is done in a proper way, that you can safely deploy and run your cases and processes there. So that's also planned to be done in 24. Then in addition to the kind of runtime environment, we also took this opportunity to fully revamp our modeler. So before, our modeler was implemented using AngularJS technology, but even more important is that the editors were implemented using something called Oryx. So that was a SVG-based editing framework, but quite dated. So we are talking about like a framework of 15 years ago, when it started. So we really wanted to do this in a modern way. So we started with our React technology, because also Flowable Work is using React as a front-end technology. And we came across React Flow, which the company is now called XI Flow, previously React Flow. And we are using that to implement the CMMN, BPMN, and DRD models. So that's really a totally new editing experience, and it should help you to more quickly implement cases and processes and etc. There's also a totally new WYSIWYG form editor. So the form editor was previously also implemented using SVG technology, which was not really a good fit. So now it's really, you see already in the editor how the form component will actually look like. So we really render the form component already in the editor. So that's also quite a big update. Then we also did introduce a new concept, which we call workspaces. So if you create an app, it's always part of a workspace. So that's your starting point, and a workspace is just a grouping of apps, basically. But what a workspace is as well is that you can use it for reusable models. So you can create a shared workspace, and then you can reference that shared workspace from other workspaces. And so in that way, from a process, you can reference a sub-process model which comes from the shared workspace. And you can do that from workspace A, you can do that from workspace B, and then you just have to create that sub-process model just one time in the shared workspace. Then in addition, we implemented a single zip file for export and import. So before we had two ways to export and import models in design. This is now just one file. So one zip file which you can use for deployment, but also to share models between different design environments. So this is really a simplification, should make it a lot easier to work with the results of a design application. Then in addition, we have something called app revisions, which add to the version history support, which we already had. But it's like a snapshot of an app at that point in time. So you can really go back to a certain app version, and then it will have exactly the same state as you had when the snapshot was created. And so it's really a nice addition to the version history support. And then because we now implemented the workspace approach, we now have a true tenant data structure. So that means you can now really separate workspaces between each other by using a different tenant. And one tenant cannot access the data in another tenant, just like we have in Flowable work. So that's now nicely separated. If you want to go with a shared workspace, you use the workspace concept. If you really want to separate data because you have different teams or something like that, you can use tenants to make sure that those are nicely separated. Actually, you can also implement or define permissions on a workspace level. So you can say this group of people has editing rights, this group of people has only read rights. So also on the workspace level, you can configure quite a bit already. So that's a big step. Then in addition, we also are working on a palette editor. And this palette editor makes it possible to customize the palette. So the stuff that you are modeling in BPMN and CMMN, you can customize that with this palette editor. We already had that option by just modifying JSON and XML files. But now this is really an addition to do this in a visual way, wizard driven, and it nicely takes you through the steps that you need to follow when you want to add a service task or script task in BPMN and CMMN, or if you want to add a new form field in the form editor. Then another important concept we added, so now we are going back to the Flowable work side, so the execution runtime side. So this is what we call external worker clients. And the main job for those is to externalize logic. Because you can imagine if you implement a process or case in our cloud environment, and you want to add some custom Java logic, custom C# logic, Node.js logic, Python, whatever. How do you do that? You cannot upload a Java class to the cloud environment. So what is the best way to then make that work? And that's where external worker tasks are quite a nice concept. So the idea is it's a task type that you can use in processes and cases. And it's basically creating a job. And then we have external worker clients, which we now have 3 flavors in at the moment, but that will be extended. So right now we have a Java, Node.js, and Python client available. And you can download those on our GitHub page, so github.com/flowable. And we also did releases to Maven Central for the Java client and to npm for the JavaScript one. So they are also just available for you to get started. And the idea is you just create a small project, a small application, and you depend, for example, on the Java dependency on the Spring Boot starter, and you implement a class. You can see an example at the bottom, and you just implement some logic. You get variables from the job, so you can access, process, and case variables. And then you just execute the logic that you want to implement, and then return the variables that you would like to give back to the process, for example. You could also even do send back a BPMN error so that you can handle logical errors as well. And so that there's quite a lot of options to work with this kind of logic and still work with our cloud environment. The way authentication is done is through access tokens. So in Flowable Work Cloud, you can create an access token, and then you can use that access token to connect to your cloud environment. Then in addition, we also did an update to our mobile applications. We already had mobile applications for iOS and Android, also available in Google Play Store and Apple App Store. But it was not really easy to set them up. So you had to configure a URL, username, password to log into your local Flowable Work environment. So now we, out of the box, use our cloud work as the main application to use the mobile application with. And the authentication automatically goes through the Microsoft authentication that we also use in our web environment. You can still configure custom URLs if you want to, but now the out-of-the-box experience with the cloud environment is just there automatically. And we implemented this using React Native. So both for iOS and Android, we use the same foundation. And the components that we have, like the form engine and other components like a task list, creating processes, cases, are done in a componentized way so that you could also use it in other third-party applications. And we are planning to add chat support, so the engage functionality, and also support for Microsoft Intune for management and mainly the mobile management, security handling in the next year. So that will come as well. Then the last bit for the cloud part is that we also added what we call a step-through functionality. So you start with Flowable design and work, and you don't know how it really works as a new user. Then we want to give this kind of training experience where you are guided through developing a process, developing an app, to deploying, and then going through your app in Flowable Work. So it gives really a guidance experience. And this is really nice for new users, of course, but it could also help new users of an app. So we did it in a way that it's really a model. And this model can also be used in every other case. So you can customize it, you can add your own steps. And so it can really give a kind of guided experience for users of your app as well. And we are also using this in our Flowable e-learning setup in our service. So we also use this quite extensively ourselves in our training that we offer. So yeah, a bit later today after this session, be sure to check out the session that talks fully in detail about Flowable in the cloud. So yeah, that's a good recommendation. And just to emphasize, if you look at cloud and on-premise, for us, it's not like you choosing one or the other. We really implemented it using the same product. So it's not like our cloud offering is moving away focus from the on-premise product. They are the same product, and all the functionality that we develop for one or the other will be available in the other side as well. So it's really a coexistence, and it's just to provide you with a choice to go either for our cloud offering or for on-premise or a combination. Yeah, now let's talk a bit about data, because it's a really important part in processes and cases. So if you look at data, it's really flowing through your cases and processes, and variables are one of the most basic examples of that. You can also think about form data, event data coming through Kafka, for example, documents that you attach to your case or process, service requests and responses, for example, with the service registry model. And for example, also referenced data that you use data objects and you reference something in an external service or as part of the database. And so it's really an important part, and that's why we emphasize that even more in Flowable by introducing the data dictionary model, which is already available in the current version of Flowable Design and Work. And this really helps you to define a structure in your JSON variables. So you can define nested structures with, for example, the example given in the screenshot where you have an order which has an address object in it, and you can go very deep in this nesting, so you can really define the full structure of your JSON variable. And this helps you, of course, in auto-completion functionality in design, but also to generate forms, for example, because we know the structure, then we can help you to generate a form for that data dictionary type. You can define constraints. So you can say this field is required. Here we have a min length or max length of this value. So you can define regex expressions so that you can define a lot of constraints there. And then when you use this data dictionary type, it gets validated automatically. So when you connect, for example, a variable to an order data dictionary type, we make sure that the structure is correct and matches all the constraints that are defined. So it really improves the data quality of your variables. So then we have the data dictionary types. So that defines the structure, but then you also want to connect it to your CMMN and BPMN models, and that's what we do with data contracts. So on the CMMN and BPMN level, you can define a data contract, you reference a data dictionary model, and you can say my order variable is actually of type order, and my address variable is of type address. And these are very basic examples, of course, but you can imagine that, there's a lot of flexibility here. And then there's a big difference between referencing data and storing data in Flowable. So by default, if you use a variable, for example, or a database data object, the data gets stored within Flowable. And for some data, that's of course needed because you need it to run your case and process. But our recommendation is to reference data as much as possible. And it can be a variable being an ID, for example, which you use then to connect with an external service using that ID to get all the information. But try to prevent creating nested variables, storing that all in Flowable, because then you also need to manage that data in Flowable, which is not always the best approach. That's why REST data objects are one way to make this work quite nicely. So if you use REST data objects, you get automatically a variable referencing the data that you are connected to. It can be a Salesforce service, can be any other external service. And in Flowable, we only store the external reference, which is an ID in general. And when you want to access that data, we automatically call the REST endpoint to fetch the data object. And you can still work with all the details, but the data doesn't live in Flowable. The data still lives in your external application. So that's quite a good way of dealing with data if possible. And we have a full session about data a bit later. So the third session in this FlowFest event by Joram and Philip. So that's good to check out if you are looking for more details there. So let's move on to connectors. So this is a new concept that we are introducing with the next release. And the idea really comes from we have a lot of model-driven connectivity options. We already mentioned service registry, event and channel models. You can implement Java scripting logic yourself to do service invocations. But we are really looking for a way to make this even easier for you with Flowable. So what we want to do is provide out-of-the-box connectivity using a number of standard connectors. And we really want to start building on this, so have more and more of these integrations. So we are starting with a Salesforce connector and a SharePoint integration in the next release, but we have more integrations planned for 24. So there will be more coming. And for this connector approach, we are reusing the models that we already have. So we are using service models to define the operations, the request responses that you need. The REST data object model that we can use for referencing data that we just discussed, that do not store the full data in Flowable, but actually you are referencing data with some identifier, and we fetch that data then automatically if you need it. And then we use a data dictionary model to define the type definition. So how does the request and response look like? And we can fully define that in a data dictionary model. And the combination of that is then a connector model. And in this example, you see, for example, connecting to a Salesforce as object, which is just an entity in Salesforce. And that you can fully do with this approach, with this connector approach, where the service model connects to Salesforce, the REST data object references the S object, and the data dictionary model describes the S object. How does it look like? And an S object can be an account, can be a lead, something like that. And the idea is that we really use this kind of connector framework as a design pattern, and as a Flowable user or partner, you can also create connectors yourself in the similar way. So one of the starting points was to do this for Salesforce. So in design, you will be given the opportunity to connect to your Salesforce environment and then select the S object that you want to work with. So if you want to work with accounts in Salesforce, you can select it. If you want to work with leads, you can select it. So that there are a lot of options. And then we generate the models for you. So we generate the service model, data object model, data dictionary model. And optionally, we can also generate pages or forms to quickly check if the connection is working. So that you can easily see, oh, I get a list of accounts. I can create an account. So we can generate that as well. So this is one of the ways we are going ahead with this connector concept. Another example is the SharePoint integration. So there you can access documents within SharePoint. So in addition to what we already had with file attachments, where you could select a file and attach it to your task form, make it part of a case or process, you can now also select a file from SharePoint and then reference that from your case and process. So just out of the box integration with your SharePoint environment, and then you don't need to copy a document to Flowable. You could still do that if needed, but it's not needed anymore. You can just reference that document, and Flowable will will fetch it for you when needed. And there's another session also in the third slot of FlowFest that will go in full detail about hyper automation and Flowable. So this is really talking about connectors and how we do this with Flowable. So now let's go to the last bit of the presentation. So we are going to talk about new and upcoming features. So one of the exciting new features that we are going to add is Flowable dashboards. So this is a new way to work with reporting, analytics, overviews in Flowable. And a dashboard is something which is configurable in Flowable work. So you can start with an empty dashboard, and then you can say, I want to add a new dashboard component to this dashboard. You get a nice library of all options that you can select from. And then you can say, I want to position it here on my screen, want to make it bigger, want to make it smaller. And in that way, you can just add 6, 8, whatever kind of dashboard components, save your dashboard, and it will be available for you as a user when you want to go to it. So it's really a nice and flexible way to work with data and analytics in Flowable, and it really gives you access to a lot of insights that we can fetch from the Flowable database and Elasticsearch. And the chart is connected to a query, and a query is in the end again a model. So you can define a query using a wizard. So you can say, I want to get all tasks which have this category value, or give me all tasks that are created after this date. And then you can connect that to a dashboard component. So you can show it in a pie chart, in a line chart, in a bar chart, also a data table. So that's also a component available in this dashboard. And then in addition, when you have defined the dashboard components in your dashboard, you can also provide filters. So as you can see at the top in the screenshot, you can define end date, start date, and then the dashboard will automatically adjust to the values that you have selected. And so there are also automatic filters available for you, and then the dashboard responds to that automatically. So this is a small overview of how the query editor looks like. So it's really helping you to define a query. It's quite advanced, so you can also define groups of and or logic and combine that. You can configure aggregation, so you can do counts, sums, average kind of results, and show that nicely in, for example, a single value dashboard component. And yeah, when you defined the query model, you can nicely connect it to the dashboard component. And the query model gets automatically translated into a native Elasticsearch query. So you don't have to have any Elasticsearch knowledge. That's automatically done. Yeah, then there's the topic about Flowable and AI. We also have a session for that, but that's in the same time slot as this presentation, but maybe you can look at that afterwards. And what we are looking into is how can we make it easier to generate models based on chat instructions or images? How can we make or propose email content, document content? And there's a great webinar, which if you didn't see it yet, is provided in this link, where we go in full detail on how Flowable can help you there. But we want to look a bit beyond the hype. So we are looking for ways on how we can easily integrate AI services in case and process models, and make it easier to start modeling your case and process model based on natural language. So you can describe how the model should look like. Flowable will generate it for you. Also with forms, you can provide an image or even an image of a PDF document. We will automatically generate the form for you. Generate dashboards, analyze data. So that's the direction that we are looking into. And in the AI talk, yeah, that you could watch afterwards, you will be able to see the kind of direction and the details where we are going with this. Then there will be a topic about SLA management, where you can configure due dates for reaction times, completion times. You can define how a task should be initialized with certain priority assignments. You can define escalation steps that 1 hour before the due date is set. Send an email, send a conversation message, things like that. And of course, then also use the new dashboard functionality to make this visible to the user. And the last bit before we go into questions is that we launched Flowable 7 in our open source project. So this is the new project supporting Spring Boot 3, moving to the Jakarta namespace, having a minimum Java level of 17. And there we really focus on CMMN, BPMN, DMN. So we basically focused also the code base on this. And so you will see a bit of changes there, but also not, because the APIs and everything is still exactly the same. We just moved to Spring Boot 3 support, and we didn't want to do this as part of 6 because it's quite a major jump to support at least Java 17 there. So that's the main reason to go with Flowable 7. And the new Flowable Cloud environment is also available for you as a design tooling. So you can just register and then model your CMMN, BPMN, and DMN models in the cloud. And there's no 30-day limit on that. You can still continue that after the 30-day trial that we set by default. So yeah, that's where we start with any questions that are maybe asked.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Tijs, for the presentation. I was gathering a few questions. We only have a few minutes left, so yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah.
There are a few questions coming in. The first one here, they ask, will there be any Git integration or functionality in the Cloud Modeler and integration with GitHub or GitLab?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we typically integrate with a database to store model revisions and model versions. But we did already do some exploration that maybe also Git can be used as the for storage and versioning of models. So it's definitely something that we are looking at. And yeah, I do expect that we will have support at some point. I just can't say yet when that will be.
All right. And then another question about something, if it will be available in us, they ask if inspect or control are going to be available in Flowable Cloud.
Yeah, so I think control, that's probably going to take a bit longer because that also has certain security implications. I think for inspect, we already made sure that it's tenant aware so that you can't go across your tenant there. But that also has some security implication that when you enable inspect, there's more REST APIs open by default, so to say. So we are looking into making that fully secure, and then that's definitely going to be available in the cloud as well.
Okay, I think we have only time for one more, but the rest of the questions we will get to by email. So then one last question. About workspaces, and they ask if it's possible to use them to separate between your dev, QA, and production environments, and if that was kind of the intention when implementing it.
So the intention was more that you have a grouping of apps, and that you can define a shared workspace for your reusable models. So that was the foundation of the design. But yeah, for sure, you can have a dev workspace, a QA workspace, and a production workspace, so you can nicely move your apps between workspaces. So that's definitely another way of using it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was all the time we had for this presentation.